Welcome, everyone. I'm assuming we had a little bit of a technical problem, but I'm assuming that everyone now is on and that we're working fine. So we're ready to go. This is part of the Free State Foundation's 13th annual conference. This year, of course, we had to go virtual. Usually, as many of you know, we're at the National Press Club for our annual conference, and many of you have been with us. I promise you, well, I'm hopeful, of course, that we'll be back there next year. I'm pretty certain that we will be. So far this year, we've been delighted to have as part of our conference, like again in these virtual events, an FCC chair, 2 FCC commissioners, 2 FTC commissioners, panel with 4 of our prestigious academic board members. And now, of course, today we're delighted to have with us a key congressman whom I'm going to introduce in just a moment. By the way, if you haven't heard, this is the Free State Foundation 15th annual, 15th anniversary this year. We started in 2006, so we're excited about that. And sometime before the end of the year, we're going to have a proper celebration of that key milestone. We're, by the way, one other, by the way, I know that C-SPAN is joining us today. We're always delighted when we have our C-SPAN audience with us, and we're grateful that C-SPAN is covering another one of the Free State Foundation's events, as they have many times in the past. So now we're pleased to welcome back once again Congressman Bob Latta for today's session. I say welcome back because Congressman Latta has participated in at least 2 previous Free State Foundation events, albeit it's been a while, and since then much has occurred, not the least of which is a pandemic, of course. So there's a lot has changed. So now I want to formally introduce Congressman Bob Latta, and with his permission, I'm going to give you the shortened version of his bio. Well, because there's an awful lot there, really, and but I'm going to give you the short version. Of course, the full version is on the Congressman's website, of course. So, since 2007, Congressman Latta has served the people of Ohio's 5th congressional district in the House of Representatives. He's a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where he plays a leading role in crafting telecommunications, energy, environment, healthcare, and interstate commerce policy. Most importantly, for our purposes here today, Congressman Latta is the Republican leader of the House Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. He's also a member of the Subcommittee on Energy and the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce, which he chaired during the last Congress. Along with his committee positions, Congressman Latta is a deputy whip and co-chairs the Rural Broadband Caucus. On Mr. Latta's website, his bio says he advocates for policies that help consumers, that grow our economy, and to spur innovation. Yogi Berra famously said, you can observe a lot just by watching. Well, I've been watching Congressman Latta for many years now at his work, and I've observed that indeed his work has helped consumers. It has promoted innovation, and it's promoted economic growth. Congressman Latta is married. He has two children, and lives in Bowling Green, Ohio. Now, before I turn it over to him, I just want to remind you that we'd welcome your tweets if you're so inclined. The handle for today's event is is hashtag FSFCONF13, hashtag FSFCONF13, and please feel free to tweet away. And with that, Congressman Latta, we're honored to have you here again with us, and the floor is yours.
Well, Randy, thank you very much, and congratulations to Free State on your 15th anniversary and all of your work and your contributions that you've done over that time. So congratulations to that. It's so important, the work that you do. And thank you very much for having me this morning. You know, I told my schedule, I'd like to know how many Zooms we've done in the last, 13, 14, 15 months. When you said about getting back to the press club, I'll guarantee it that you'll be there the next time around, because you know, we're fast approaching almost 300 million vaccines in this country. We've gone over 5 million in Ohio, so we'll be there. So I look forward to when you're having everybody back at the press club. But you know, the Energy and Commerce Committee is I've been very privileged to serve on it since 2010, and it's important because the way I see it is that we look over the horizon 5 to 10 years. And so we want to make sure that we're getting the right legislation and then the right regulations in place, so that we're not inhibiting those entrepreneurs and those innovators out there. So we have to make sure we get it right. And so we need to hear from everybody. But as we look back over, you know, when the pandemic struck, and I can remember doing many of our meetings right here in this office back in the district by Zoom. And it's important that we really look at to see how many, what we've accomplished during that period of time. I know I was contacted by one of my constituents down in Bloomdale in southern Wood County. And Sarah was telling me that how she and her family, her 3 children, are, you know, for teleeducation, were having an issue, and also working from home and everything else that had to be done. So, you know, that's one of the reasons I'm one of the co-founders of the Rural Broadband Caucus. We want to make sure that we get the broadband out across the country, because if you just think what we were able to do during the pandemic with teleeducation, telehealth, working from home, staying in communications with our loved ones, it's really important. And so, you know, as Republicans, we've really prioritized that broadband availability during the pandemic, because we have to do all of these things out there to make sure that people stay connected, and for all the important reasons. And we also worked with our Democrat colleagues to make sure that we had the resources available during the COVID in the packages that we did pass. And, you know, it's important that, you know, as you said, the different folks that you've been meeting with, I had Commissioner Carr in my district during the, I guess it was early summer last year. And it was kind of interesting because of a grant program that one of our health organizations had received here, behavioral health. They had only done about 467 telehealth service visits up to that time. And in that short period of time that the pandemic had struck, and the commissioner and I both had to ask twice to make sure we heard it right, they had done 16,000 in that short period of time. So we're just seeing a complete transformation was happening out there. And so we want to make sure that we don't have waste out there. We want to make sure that we get the funds where they need to be, because it's so important to make sure we keep people connected and getting it done. And when you talk about getting it done, you know, we really have to look at industry and what industry's been able to do, and the work that happened last year. You know, the industry backing off, making sure that consumers that couldn't make their payments during that time frame weren't disconnected. And also making sure that what we saw with the leadership from Chairman Pye and what he did, and we saw it happen without that heavy-handed relationship of government on industry. And I think that's really important, because when you think about what we want to see happen out there, and what the other side sees at the same time, that we don't want to have our efforts being misguided. And we want that light touch. And again, that light touch regulation, it was about 2 years ago that I saw the number was about $1.7 trillion. That's T as in Tom, having been invested out there. And so that's what's also really helped to make sure that we have the service that we had. And so it's that light touch regulation. It's making sure that, industry can get out there and expand is why it's so important. And it's also, when you think about during the pandemic, that we saw that, the United States actually was able to increase speed because, again, it's that what the industry had been able to do during this time frame leading up to the pandemic. You go over to Europe and other countries around the world, we saw that they weren't able to do that. And so I think it's really important that we think about what happened during the pandemic and what we were able to get accomplished. And a lot of it was through that leadership of the private industry and what they got out there. But, we want to make sure that we take care of these gaps out there. And, part of those issues is when you think about the gaps, I know several years ago, the FCC asked us to look at the maps of our respective states. And I'll never forget looking at Ohio, and I was looking at my district, which is in Northwest, West Central Ohio. I go underneath Michigan and halfway down Indiana on my western border. And it looked like my entire district was covered. And we knew, anybody that's out in your district enough, and I'm out in my district all the time, I know it, I see it, I hear it from my constituents that, where that coverage isn't. So we want to make sure that we get the coverage out there. We want to help the unserved areas. And of course, there's underserved areas, but I'll touch on that. But, we as Republicans on the Energy and Commerce Committee have brought forward our American Broadband Act, and there's a package of 24 bills this year. And because really, if you're really thinking about the couple of big things we want to make sure is that we're cutting that red tape, and we're also streamlining the process out there so that people can get the service they've got to have. We want to also target those, as I said, those unserved areas, our rural areas. And we want to make sure that we really turbocharge those public and private investments across the country to make sure we get this thing done. Our proposal is $23 billion. And again, we want to make sure that we're helping these unserved areas across the United States. And, it's in, these years go by too quickly, but I worked on the data broadband maps bills that we've had, and to make sure that we do have the accurate maps across the country. And so that was through the Broadband Data Act. And so, we, again, before you start dumping money into areas that you don't know where you have people that either are already being served or are underserved, let's look at these areas that are unserved right off the bat, because first of all, we don't want to see duplication out there, and we don't want to see taxpayer dollars being wasted. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And so that's, again, why in our bills that we brought forward, as I said, we really want to target these areas, making sure that we're helping the areas out there. And because I think if you think, it's like in our rural areas, I did the precision agriculture legislation back during the last farm bill. And it's important because, again, farmers' productivity can go up because of that precision agriculture. I'll give you an example. My mom was raised on a farm. My wife was raised on a farm, both of them being in the district. When my mom was a kid, my grandfather was still farming with a team of horses. But as the years went by and he switched over to the tractors, and I was down at an event several years ago in my district, and they said, would you want to run the tractor? And they were putting fertilizer in, and they're going to be able to drop a planter in the same, almost within 1 inch of that spot in the next year. And so when I got behind the wheel and down I went, and I turned around and looked, my grandfather had been so proud of me if he would have seen what I had just done. But the reason was I never touched the steering wheel because the tractor was running off by itself. But that's what we can do out there today. Another area, that there's been a lot of concern with that we've been dealing with in not only in the committee, but talking about in Congress is Section 230. That was that sword and shield that was put out there to protect the companies. But one of the things is that what we don't want to see happen is that private speech is being deterred out there. It's so important that we have it it's open out there, and so we want to make sure that, as the Democrats talk about some of the disinformation, things like that. I know that when we had one of our hearings, Professor Turley, who's a constitutional expert, testified that one of the things you want to always make sure is you have more information out there, not less, because you have to have it out there for people. And so the question is, do you want a company making the decisions, or someone saying, well, we got how our programs are set up, and this is how we're going to determine whose speech we're going to allow on. You know, in the last couple of years, we've seen it's been conservative speech has really been affected by it. So we want to make sure that we get it right. And so I'm sure that we're going to be addressing Section 230. And it's one of the things that Republicans and Democrats, we have to agree on to get this thing done. But one of the things when you're modernizing Section 230, we have to be careful about this. You don't want to make it too prohibitive out there, because again, we want competition, and competition comes from the small and medium companies coming about. But if you make it so tough that they're not ever going to be able to get started to begin with, it's going to be really leaving it up to the companies that are there already. And some of the folks have told me, and some of the companies, well, they'll survive because they'll just lawyer up whatever the new government law, regulations, or legislation is. But we don't want to cut out those small people out there that want to get these things started. And so again, when you think back to the Section 230 was taking down, illegal and obscene content. But again, we don't want to see that dialogue, especially on the political side, being cut back. So there are a lot of different issues that we're going to be talking about and we're working on in the House, especially in the committee. But again, I'm very, very committed to make sure that we get the broadband out across the country, because if we don't, we're going to have too many areas that are affected. And it's going back to Sarah in my district. We want to make sure that her kids can do their homework from home. And it's just not just during the pandemic, but, so many schools now pretty much require that, work's being done from the kids' computers. We can give all the computers out that we want, but if they can't connect, it's worthless. And if we have to rely on a hotspot somewhere, we can't have somebody drive 20, 30 miles to a hotspot to do their homework. So we want to make sure that it's out there across the country. So I look forward as the Republican leader on the Communication and Technology Subcommittee to keep working to make sure we get these things done and get it done right for the people here in the United States. And Randy, I really appreciate having you on this morning.
Congressman Latta, thank you so much. It's wonderful to have you back again. As I said at the beginning, you've been kind to be with us before, and it's been a while, so we're delighted. Congressman Latta agreed that he would take a few questions, and I appreciate that. And I know that our C-SPAN viewers as well always appreciate that. So, Congressman Latta, let me ask these questions. And of course, broadband is at the top of our minds, and for everyone now, and the pandemic has just heightened that sensitivity to its importance, even among those like yourself, and I put myself in this category as well, who I think had an understanding of its importance before, but even more so. So you talked about the Republican alternative to the Biden plan, and to be upfront about it, I've been critical of several different aspects of the Biden broadband plan, and so let me ask you this a little more specifically. One of the things in the Biden plan is that it seems to explicitly favor directing subsidies to municipal broadband systems, and it's fairly explicit about that. So I'm wondering what your reaction to that is. And then another aspect that's at least troubled me is there's the suggestion in the plan. This is not as explicit, but it seems to be the case if you read between the lines that there might be a call for rate regulation of broadband services because of the references to the prices not being that the prices being too high in the view of the Biden administration. Can you comment on those two aspects and say whether the Republican plan either is in agreement or disagreement with those aspects?
First of all, you don't want anybody to be favored out there. That's the number one thing. You want competition. And, I can still remember going back, boy, six or 8 years ago. It's hard to believe how the time goes by. But I remember when Greg Walden was the subcommittee chairman at that time, we were having hearings about what was going on where federal dollars were going out to compete against small companies that had been out there trying to expand and help people in their community. We don't want to see a situation where you're giving money to the benefit of one, and in this case, it's going to be a municipality. You don't want to see that because, again, you want to have fair competition. And I know that the hearings that we had, and I remember explicitly, it's hard. It seems like it was only yesterday that Corey Gardner, who used to sit next to me before he went to the Senate in the committee, and we had some committee hearings dealing specifically with what was happening out in Colorado. And so you don't want to have the local entrepreneurs have been doing everything they possibly could to get out there and get that out there. So we want to make sure that you don't have that happening. And also, I think, on the second part of your question dealt with on
rate regulation.
Rate regulation. If you look what's happened in the last few years, the speeds have gone up and costs have gone down. And that wasn't because of the federal government. That's because of what the companies have been able to get done out there. And so again, once you start putting these rate regulations, then you're gonna, you can inhibit what can happen out there. And again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a couple of years ago, the old number I'd seen, I'm sure it's much higher today, was $1.7 trillion that the privates had invested out there to make sure that we had what we had going into the pandemic. We didn't have, as I mentioned, we had increased speeds. We didn't have slowdowns. We didn't have problems like other parts of the world. So I don't want to see the federal government going in there and inhibiting the entrepreneurs and the folks out there that deliver the services to us.
Congressman Latta, I appreciated what you said about Section 230 and the consideration of it in Congress. And, again, in the interest of disclosure, I've been concerned about the cancel culture and the extent to which that might be shrinking the space in which we have public debate and there's a lot that comes under that rubric, but in general, I'm concerned that we don't have as much space to debate issues of public concern as we should. And so I want to, and 230 has been part of that debate along with, other potential remedies. And I guess on the 230 point, I think perhaps you were implying this, I just want to ask you about it, that so much has changed since 1996. And of course, the platforms today are so large and have so much more market power. It would one possible solution that might be considered be, because you mentioned the concern about the smaller entities and new entities, to be somehow have a carve out that has a higher standard of care, perhaps some higher duty for those platforms that are above X amount in terms of revenues or whatever, and for those that are not that are smaller, they still would have a level of protection that resembles perhaps somewhat what we have today in Section 230.
Well, again, for, the viewers, pretty much everybody's been hearing so much about Section 230, there's some talk out there, should we just get rid of Section 230? But that's where I fall back to that we don't want to hurt those new startups that could go out there and be the next ones out there offering the services that people would want. So we don't want to, in my opinion, we don't want to just throw it out but I think there's going to have to be some, revisions that we're going to have to do to it. And that's where we're going to have to iron out the differences with the Republicans and the Democrats, where we find the common ground to get there. Because again, it's really important that that with Section 230 that those companies have it, because it's we hear about the algorithms, well, it's not our fault, it's the algorithm. Well, who's developing the algorithms that find certain words that seem to always fall back on conservatives? And I know that early on with Section 230, the debate that was going on when Marsha Blackburn, before she was elected to the Senate, she was also she sat to my left on committee. Not that she's left, but she was on my left side, and she's very right-sided. But Marsha, I remember that she had a tweet that was taken down for no reason at all, but should not have been taken. So we're seeing it. We don't hear from the Democrats or the liberals, hearing from them saying they've got a problem, things being taken down. It's always on the conservative side of the speech. And so again, we want to make sure that that these companies aren't the ones out there that are determining what the American people are going to hear. Because as I mentioned, again, it was a very interesting paper that Professor Hurley had, Professor Turley had written for the committee hearing. And as I recommend it for people because again, it's very, very important that we have, as he said, more speech, not limited speech.
Congressman Latta, I participated in C-SPAN program, The Communicators. I know you were on, I think, just the week before me. The program that I did actually was running this weekend, and it was on the cancel culture, and we had a good discussion about it on that program. But one of the things that I said that's relevant to the discussion that we're having about the smaller companies versus the larger companies, I pointed out that Google has said, and they always said the same thing when we were discussing net neutrality, and you're familiar with the net neutrality battles, but Google would often say, well, we're not concerned about ourselves. We can take care of ourselves. We're so large. We're concerned about the next Google, and I think you were expressing the concern too. But I said that whenever I hear that, I always tell people that if you believe Google's concerned about the next Google, then I've got a bridge that I might want to sell you someplace. Well, let me just ask you a final question. Then I know you've got to go, and we won't take more of your time. But this is a question that came in from Deb Collier, who is a very knowledgeable telecom analyst with Citizens Against Government Waste. And Deb Collier says that I notice in the American Broadband Act that the NTIA will be the agency awarding the grant funding. What mechanisms will be put in place to avoid duplication with grants and funds issued by the USF and the RUS, or Rural Utility Service programs?
I think two things. In the legislation, we're going to make sure as we go forward that, again, that we don't have that duplication, because again, we were looking for those unserved areas out there. Not I always have to express the difference between an unserved and underserved area. And when you look at the Biden plan, the Democrat plan that's circulating out there, that certain areas that, depending on what speeds are, they can consider it an underserved area as an unserved area. And so all of a sudden you can be seeing a huge flow of federal dollars going to areas that are already receiving service. I think the other thing is so important is not just on the legislative language, but it's also on the regulatory language, but it's also what we have to do as a committee. It's our jurisdiction to hold oversight hearings to make sure that that the regulators are doing what they're supposed to do. What Congress's intent is, because again, I see the taxpayers' dollars out there as like the way we run our own homes. Is that we want to spend every dollar wisely. We don't want anything wasted, because again, you're never going to get that dollar back. And when I always think about the $27 trillion debt out there, and when you look at the deficits that we've run, and they're looking for forecasting in this year alone, and just going out in the 10-year at the beginning of this year, we're going to almost pay $800 billion just to pay interest on the debt by 2031. So we've got to think about how every dollar is spent. I consider myself a true fiscal conservative. I'm pretty, I think my family say dad's, and my wife, yeah, he's pretty frugal. That's how we have to get things done. But I believe treating every dollar as you treat one at home. But, you know, any ideas, suggestions from folks out there are always welcome, because that's what we want to hear from people, you know, other ways that we can do things and how we can make sure that we are exercising that oversight and making sure that we're wisely spending each taxpayer dollar.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes my wife, Congressman Latta, may think that I'm too much of a conservative as well. So we share that in common. You know, I just say before I let you go regarding your last remarks, because you mentioned speed when you were talking about broadband and the Democratic proposal, and so, you know, another concern, and maybe we'll be talking about this further as these matters proceed, but I think the Biden proposal suggests upping the definition of broadband to 100 megabits up and 100 megabits down, and you know, as an aspirational goal, that may sound good, and in fact, it may be good aspirationally, but you know, at least in my view, we've got to be careful about, number one, embodying the definition of broadband per se in legislation, actually, and then aside from that, that if you do set the definition so that it's higher than the present use cases support and the present consumer demand, what you also may have the effect of doing is foregoing or closing out certain technologies that otherwise are the right ones to serve particular areas of the country, foreclose them from being part of the, you know, the programs that we need. So that's just another concern. Well, look, this has been terrific, again, for you to join us. And, you know, I'm sorry, you know, before our viewers joined, we had those problems, and you were very patient. And I've got a background that I haven't used before, but it all worked out. So we're grateful that you're able to spend this time with us. We look forward to having you again, of course, in the future. And thanks for the work you do, Congressman Latta.
Well, thank you. And again, congratulations on your 15th anniversary and all the work that you've all done over those 15 years. So many congrats. And like I said, I'm sure that your next meeting will be in person and not by Zoom. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll be adjourned, and everyone take care. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.